The Teen Titans are without a doubt one of DC's most iconic properties. And even though that's the case, this team still has yet to get a decent live action adaptation, whether it's a movie or a TV show. And yes, I'm saying TV show because Titans was absolute garbage. But now that we're getting James Gunn's DCU, the odds of us getting a decent Titans adaptation are actually very high. And a Teen Titans live action movie was actually in development at DC Studios. However, the script is being put on pause so that the writer of that movie can focus on the Wonder Woman script, which makes complete sense because I do think that you should introduce Wonder Woman before the Titans. That being said, again, because of the Titans being so iconic for DC's lore and mythos, it is imperative that they get the Titans right in this live action adaptation. But that begs the question, how exactly should they adapt the Teen Titans in the DCU? And in this video, I'm going to be answering just that by giving you my ideal Teen Titans saga for the DCU. But very quickly, before we get into the video, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share if you enjoy the content, and also hype the video if you have that feature available. It would mean a lot. Diving right into the topic, the first thing that we need to establish is that the continuity within the DCU is a little bit iffy. And when I say iffy, I don't mean in a bad way. I mean in the sense that it's a little bit all over the place for a lot of the major characters. A perfect example of this would be the DCU's Batman, who's already going to be up to Damian Wayne, but the Justice League hasn't formed yet. Now, obviously, even though Batman has this experience, he's still going to be relative in age to a lot of the main Justice Leaguers like Superman and John Stewart, who are both in their 30s, or early 30s, I should say. Meaning that, again, even though a lot of these heroes are going to be experienced, they're still relatively young and in their early primes. This affects the timeline of the Teen Titans because the Teen Titans are usually a team that comes after the Justice League and is specifically formed because of their sidekicks wanting to step out of the Justice Leaguer's shadows. And personally, I think that this is a very important aspect of the Teen Titans, and I still think that it will be the case for the Teen Titans in the DCU. It just won't happen in the traditional sense that we're used to. Now, before I get into the actual saga, I'm going to briefly break down what the potential timeline for a lot of the Titans characters could be in relation to the main Justice Leaguers. Starting with Dick Grayson Robin, aka Nightwing, I do think that by the time we see him in the DCU, he's already going to be in the Nightwing role. And I think that this first appearance will obviously be in Brave and the Bold. However, if we assume that the DCU's current continuity is going linear with IRL time, so like for example, Superman 2025 takes place in 2025 in the DCU, 2026 happens in 2027, and then if we get Brave and the Bold in 2028, that will mean that 3 years have passed from Superman up until Brave and the Bold in the DCU, the same way it has in real life. I think that Dick Grayson may have just became Nightwing in the DCU's continuity, meaning that as of Superman 2025, Dick Grayson is finally leaving the mantle of Robin and becoming Nightwing, which would mean that right now in the DCU, Dick Grayson is hypothetically 17 years of age. And by the time we see him in Brave and the Bold, he would have already been Nightwing for 3 years, and that's when he meets Damian Wayne. Now, obviously, this is younger than what he is in the comics when he meets Damian Wayne, because I'm pretty sure he's like early 20s, like 23 years old when Damian Wayne shows up in the comics. But I think that it's obvious that they're going to condense the DCU Batman's timeline, which in turn would condense a lot of the Bat family members' timelines as well. That being said, if Dick Grayson is around 20 years old at this point in time, I think that the rest of the Titans should be anywhere from 17 to 20 as well. And that brings me to the very first Titans movie in this saga, which is going to be Teen Titans, Titans Together. And yes, I stole the name from the popular episode. Now, just to lay down some pre-existing context, I do want this film to come out after the very first Justice League film in the DCU. So if the Justice League film drops in 2029 or 2030, I would want this movie to come out the following year or in the same year, just later on. And that's because one of the main plots of this movie will be the Teen Titans becoming a public team after the Justice League becomes a public team. However, even though this project is going to be the Titans' first time coming out as a proper team, in my saga, this won't be the actual first time that the Titans fight together as a team. This is just the first time they go public about it. So a lot of the OG Titans roster will have history going into this movie, kind of like how we've been seeing in the DCU already, with a lot of characters already having pre-established history that we just haven't seen yet. And that way we know that characters like Dick Grayson did in fact spend some time with the Titans as Robin. As for the history of the Titans before them going public in this movie, I'll explain that later in this video. Continuing with the major details of this first movie, Teen Titans, Titans Together, the roster would obviously consist of Nightwing, who would be around 20 to 21 years old in this film, Starfire, who would be around the same age as Nightwing, Wally West, who would still be Kid Flash, but obviously an older version of Kid Flash at 19 years old. Beast Boy would also obviously be a major player, but he would be around 17 years old. Then we'd have Donna Troy, who would also be around 20 years old, similar to Dick Grayson and Starfire. Raven would also be on the team at this point, and she would be 18 years old to match Beast Boy. Cyborg would also be on the team team at 19 years old. I'd also include Roy Harper, aka Speedy, and I'd want him to be 19 to 20 years old to match Donna Troy. And lastly, I'd want the newest member of this team to be Terra, and I'd want her introduction to also be explained in this movie so that fans going in know the context of how she joined the team, and I'd also just want that to play out very similar to how it plays out in the comics. That being said, I think it's obviously important to keep her dynamic with Beast Boy because he's the main reason as to why she joins the Titans in the first place, and her being on the team would obviously plant the seeds for Judas' contract. As for the villains of this film, I would want it to start off a little bit more on the smaller scale, and I would have it be Hive and the Fearsome Five. The Fearsome Five's roster would consist of Jinx, Gizmo, Mammoth, Simon, and Shimmer, and the main plot would effectively be Hive trying to utilize the Fearsome Five to get rid of the Titans, and their motivations would be to try and stop the Titans from inspiring the youth and other metahumans. And because the Titans themselves are a youth group, Hive will consider them dangerous and reckless. The Titans in the past will have also been directly responsible for thwarting a lot of Hive's plans, and with Hive being another private organization, I feel like this fits perfectly within the DCU, considering that we have Argus, Checkmate, etc., and the main themes right now is governments, corporations, and metahumans, and how those three factions are fighting about the current way of life within the DCU. The events of Teen Titans Together will lead us directly into the sequel to this film, and that is Teen Titans Judas Contract. And obviously, like it says in the title, this movie will loosely adapt the iconic storyline of Judas Contract. That being said, obviously the main villain of this movie will be Deathstroke the Terminator, and Terra will obviously be revealed to be a mole on the Titans who was working with Deathstroke the entire time. Another character I'd also want to fight side by side with Deathstroke in this movie is his daughter Rose Wilson, aka Ravager, and that's largely because of the fact that in the DCU the timeline's already extremely condensed, so I feel like it's better to introduce Ravager now because Cassandra Cain's probably running around on the Bat family at this point, especially considering they have Damian Wayne, so I feel like it just makes more sense to include her now. As far as the Titans roster in this film, it'll be the same exact roster from the first film, except they'll be adding Damian Wayne Robin to the fold and also Jaime Reyes Blue Beetle. And yes, I know adding these two pretty much copies what they did in the DCAMU, however, I think that it makes sense for the DCU considering that the structure of the timeline is also kind of similar to the DCAMU. That being said, to explain why Damian Wayne is now on the team, I'd simply make it so that Batman, who's now probably going to be a little bit more busy with things involving the Justice League, sends Damian Wayne to be under his big brother's wing. It would also be a good opportunity for Damian Wayne to socialize with other people that are closer to his age, considering that he was robbed of that during his time with the League of Assassins. And Damian Wayne being mentored by Dick Grayson specifically is very important for his arc in the comics, and I think that that should also be the case in live action. However, they're obviously probably not going to have Batman die the way he does in the comics, so I think that this is the second best option to complete said arc. As for Jaime Reyes Blue Beetle, I think that it would just make sense for him to be a new recruit. As for the main plot of this film, again, it would be Deathstroke going after the Titans from the inside with Terra, and his motivations would largely be because of the fact that he feels like the Titans are responsible for the death of his son, Grant Wilson. And we would find out in this movie that this actually happened in the past when Dick Grayson was Robin and the Titans were still in their infancy. As far as Terra betraying the Titans, I actually think that it would be pretty cool if we could see some of the Titans picking up on her weird behavior, specifically Raven and Damian Wayne. Obviously with Raven, this is something that's comic accurate because she was very skeptical of Terra's intentions from the start because of Raven's powers and abilities. As far as Damian Wayne, I feel like with him being the son of Batman, him sensing Terra's intentions from the start would also just be pretty cool because it would just continue to play into the theme of him being very similar to his father. And I also feel like it would just be super in character for Damian Wayne to pick up on that. This could also point out one of the flaws in how Nightwing leads because he's too trusting. And with Nightwing feeling directly responsible for this failure, I feel like that also helps to further his narrative. And that narrative is obviously him wanting to be better than Batman without having to be exactly like Batman. That being said, in the conclusion of this film, I would want Rose Wilson to actually turn on Slade and help the Titans. And I would want her reason for this to largely be because of the fact that Slade's relationship with Terra opens her eyes. Now, personally, I don't know if the DCU is fully going to lean into Slade being a pedo, but I do think that it kind of makes the relationship between Terra and Slade a little bit more impactful for the story if Terra is in fact young while Slade is obviously a grown-ass man. So I'd actually have Terra join the Titans at 16 years old so that by the time Judas Contract happens, she's still a minor at 17. This would aid in Rose turning on Slade because she would see him for who he truly is through his relationship again with Terra and with obviously Nightwing and the Titans trying to steer her in the right direction. And Rose Wilson turning on Slade would play a big role into how the Titans defeat Slade in this film. Another plotline I think would be pretty cool to explore in this movie would be Roy Harper's battle with addiction. For those of you who don't know, Roy Harper in the comics did have a period where he was addicted to drugs, and this actually led to him briefly quitting the Titans and being a hero. In this movie, because of his addiction, I would want him to feel partially responsible for letting Terra Gamora infiltrate the Titans. And because of this guilt, he'll want to distance himself from the Titans in order to become better. So at the end of this film, he would also leave the Titans temporarily. Moving on to the next project in this saga, I have Titans Young Justice, and this will be an HBO Max series. And this project will follow the events of Judas Contract, in which Nightwing and the Titans will look to expand their ranks with more oversight to not only combat Hive, but also to prevent how easily Slade picked them apart in Judas Contract. And this is obviously pulling inspiration from the Young Justice animated show, in which Nightwing is pretty much the overseer of the Young Justice. And that way, even though they're expanding their ranks, Nightwing will be able to closely monitor whoever is on the team. I would also want this project to lead to characters like Tim Drake Robin joining the fold, Connor Kent Superboy, Aqualad, Impulse, obviously Ravager Rose Wilson from the last film, and Wonder Girl Cassie Sandsmark. Obviously you could also include some other young heroes, but those are the main young heroes that I would want to see in this show. And the same heroes that I just named will operate as their own entity as the Young Justice, but will still be an extension of the Titans. And the leader of this faction will be Tim Drake. And as for the main threat of this project, I would want them to be going up against Cadmus, very similar to how Young Justice plays out in the animated show. Obviously for the main plot, you could also tie in some other things into the show, but because I don't necessarily know the exact direction of the DCU, I'm not sure of what the plot should be for this show. I just know that I would want them to go up against Cadmus. And towards the end of this show, I would have the return of Roy Harper, who would now be going by the name Arsenal. And no, it would not be a clone. This would actually just be Roy Harper, who is now sobered up and a better hero. Moving on to the next movie in this Teen Titans saga, I would have Titans Terror of Trigon. And as you probably guessed, this would be the endgame level event for the Teen Titans. And it would obviously pull heavy inspiration from the Terror of Trigon storyline. As for the cast of characters in this film, I would want it to include the entirety of the Titans and the Young Justice. And because I would want the Titans and the Young Justice to stand on their own, I wouldn't want them to get help from the Justice League, so I'd probably write it so that the Justice League are off-world doing another mission. But because of the fact that Trigon is going to be the main threat of this film, I would want this film to focus solely on Raven's dynamic with Trigon and have Raven be at the forefront of this film. I'd also want this movie to further explore relationships between the Titans like Raven and Beast Boy. I also forgot to mention earlier that Dick Grayson and Starfire will already be a thing at this point, and they will have been a thing since the first Titans movie. But ultimately, this movie would be a culmination of all of the projects that we got in the Titans lore beforehand. And once this movie is said and done, because I don't know if the DCU would continue with more Titans movies after the fact, I have the last project in this saga being a Teen Titans Year One animated film, which will just serve as a prequel to fill the gap of the time that we missed prior to the Titans publicly coming out as a team. And obviously this movie will showcase the formation of the original Teen Titans roster when they were all kids. So obviously members like Cyborg, Raven, and Beast Boy will not be on the team at this point. And this movie could also showcase the introduction of Starfire. And the main villain of this film would again be Deathstroke the Terminator, and it would showcase the actual events that transpired when his son Grant Wilson was killed. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I would do a Teen Titans saga within the DCU. Obviously, I'm sure there's some things that a lot of people won't agree with, like the Titans predating the Justice League, but I feel like the best way to do that is again to make them not be a fully established team in the public eye the way the Justice League will be when they show up. So that way, again, it's like the Titans are still coming after the Justice League because of the fact that they only go public after the Justice League goes public. And another thing I forgot to mention in the beginning of this video is that they will be operating out of Titans Tower once they go public in the first movie. So beforehand, they aren't operating out of Titans Tower. And in the early years, specifically Teen Titans Year One era, this will be when they utilize their cave headquarters. And this headquarters could be gifted to them by the likes of Batman. But overall, that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure again to like, comment, subscribe, and share. And also hit the hype button if you have that feature available. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. As always, it's been K the God.